but the pieces in the middle, 24 and 25, are owned by Gary Carlson, and they are actually used as an ag use. But in the future, you can see that borders right against the city of Chubbuck. There are things that are moving in this direction that are much more residential in nature than they are in agricultural. So that said, if you look in the in the upper left-hand corner, I believe it's parcels 1 and 2 are owned by a gentleman by the name of Jim Davis, and he approached us some time ago, probably 6 months, just in an inquiry about how do I go about this, how do I go about that. Jim operates Mountain Shadow Landscaping, and he has a conditional use placed upon his property, and that travels with the land, so it doesn't necessarily matter what the zone is because of the wording in our ordinance. There has been directly to the north of Ethan Lane, which is part of the intersection of Siphon Road and Philbin. There's that small subdivision that sits on the corner that was developed by, I believe, Nick Jensen within the last 2 to 3 years. That parcel directly north of that has had huge interest in regards to purchase. What can we do with this once it's purchased, etc. So we see a lot of activity that direction, and we wanted to at least have an open discussion in a work session, gain thoughts, sentiments, ideas about from the commission. We would like to initiate from the county side, reach out to these people and let them know that we would like to rezone these properties from ag to residential suburban. Any thoughts or comments regarding that?
Well, we're not making decisions here, but as we're just talking about, like, in generalization, anytime you have a ag and urban interface is usually bad. We've kind of failed at our job in zoning, and when I say we, I mean the entire county over the last 30 years.
Sure.
Is that we really want to have, I mean, and I'm referencing now the Bannock County GIS, a zoning tool, and as you're pulling it up and you're looking, anywhere you have the pink is what I refer is your urban, your commercial general, all this other stuff, and it's butted right up with ag. And you have cities, you have subdivisions, which we can see here, that are right up against ag parcels. That's usually not very good. That's what that rural residential, rural suburban
interface
zone interface is for. Is you still allow agricultural activities, but you're starting the development process, and you're starting to keep that buffer between, you know, the ag and the urban. That's actually what that's for. Because the problem is, as I look on this map, and it's not seen on your zoning, but as we look right here, you can see this is the zone in particular. This area right here is where you're talking right here, and we have rural or residential suburban,
clear out there,
residential rural out past the ag. So what happens is we actually have created a sprawl. People have to drive through an ag area to a more dense development, and that's not what we want happening. We want densest, a little bit less ag.
So let me share with you part of the things that have occurred historically over those parcels out there in the northwest corner. I don't know the history of how they've been parceled and how they've been sold.
Zoned that way.
Well, there's particular, like for instance, we had Rick Dixon in here asking for a rezone, and he had 27 acres. If you have a solid 40, it's easy to have a center pivot on that and make it work. But over time, there's a bunch of parts and pieces that have been sold, subdivided, split, whatever, and then all of a sudden the person that has the 27 acres no longer finds it to be a viable economic agricultural use, and they put it on the market and somebody sells it, and because it meets the intent of our ordinance, they're allowed to do a subdivision. So historically, it's occurred that way just because of oddball splits, and people are interested in selling and making some money. Anyway, the one that's going to be the biggest pushback will be Mr. Carlson, will be Gary Carlson on his
Well,
24 and 25. I will invite all of these people to either meet with staff, have a general meeting, a letter will go out, we'll let them know this is what we are thinking. Please come and talk with us. Let them know that just because it is zoned a particular way doesn't mean that it is taxed differently than ag. But all of these properties, for instance, in the ag zone, you're not allowed to build a cottage structure.
Yeah.
We're not seeing a huge demand, but there is a somewhat of a demand for care of an aged person. And our ordinance allows a cottage structure in the residential zones and the rec zone.
Yeah. And residential suburban and residential rural, those still allow agricultural production.
That's correct.
Those are not limiting ag production. It just gives you more things that you can do with that ground, which is inside of that urban interface.
Which is why I made that note, Commissioner Tovey, 15, 16, and 21 are larger than 5 acres. Most everything else is 5 acres and smaller. So therefore, those properties don't apply. They don't qualify for an ag exemption.
Under 5 acres.
Under 5 acres. So therefore, it makes more sense to make them comply with the ordinance relative to a zone that is fitting the size of the property and the adjacencies that exist.
And the other thing, when we look at zoning, islands are bad. And I'm looking at the zoning map, and we have these islands that are rural residential, rural suburban, ag, and an island. That's not good. That's what we don't want to have happen. We have ag zoned in the middle of a city in commercial on its own. And those are the things that I think that we need to, as the planning and zoning, you guys need to go through and research, take it to planning and zoning board, come up with a good, because we are not the deciding factor. We still hold public hearing, we still go to that thought, but I would highly recommend that we try and clean up this mess as best we can.
Out of respect for the fact that you are the legislative body, before we even went too far down the road, I wanted to have this conversation. One, to make you aware, and two, if there were concerns and you wanted us to pull back and say no, or ask permission to move forward, whatever, that's the reason for the meeting today.
I don't have a problem with you guys doing your job and going for it and analyzing this, because I think you've made some very valid points. And you're going to have citizens that are going to push back on some of it. Understood. But I think that we need to start some of those conversations, because, like I said, having these islands that occur,
it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
It does not make.
The only island that I look at that makes sense is the rodeo grounds and the wellness complex, because neither one of them want anything with it. And really, we should change that from. That should be changed out of agriculture, and that should be changed into more commercial general or rural residential, the wellness complex area.
Okay.
It doesn't even, and that's our parcel. I mean, there's things that we need to be doing in there. Our RV grounds authorized, we had to have a conditional use permit for our RV grounds.
Recreation.
For recreation.
That's what it all is up there.
Yeah. So there needs to be some things that way, and we're looking at all those cleanups. I mean, and I would say just not the north end, but everywhere.
And then the landfill.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about that also. I think, this is one we're cleaning up. There's 3 areas right there.
Yeah.
That's one that you're talking about, the landfill and the event center.
I don't understand why the landfill is agriculture unless we're growing garbage plants or something like that.
And I'll tell you, it borders city limits of Chevy.
This piece that we're talking here,
Mhm.
all of these adjacencies, yeah. So for instance, that area that up in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a crosshatch by hand with hand lettering that says recent RS rezone by Bob Hunt.
Yeah.
There were 3 properties that were requested. That's what started some of this study clear back last fall.
I look at it as I'm sitting here on the map again, and I'm zooming in and out, and I start looking at like Rio Vista. I don't think the way that we're zoned right now, we have ag to the east of Rio Vista Road, and I don't think that we should be having ag. That whole green swath that runs out to Reservation Road I'm not seeing any, there's one, I got the parcel viewer up so you can see it. I can see one parcel that's maybe 40 acres, and the rest of them are hacked up, and they're not, these are not,
That is exactly why.
these are rural residential or rural suburban. These are not agricultural parcels. You're not putting a center, I can see the center pivots, and none of them are on it.
So let me share with you, part of the reason for that is twofold. But first is that it makes sense, and it brings our overall plan zoning in compliance with the comprehensive plan. And two, every time we have someone request a rezone, it requires us to have a public hearing.
Yeah.
And we are starting to see more and more interest in these parcels out through here that occupy and chew up precious time of people on the council as well as the commission, et cetera, for public hearings. And if we have these items corrected with a rezone, then more of that potential goes away.
I look at that, and as I look at this on the map, I have residential suburban to the to the far east on Hawthorne Road, and then past, I don't know what the other bound, but you have Philbin in that area. You have another residential suburban, and then you have some residential rural. You have this ag, and then you have the reservation. So how do we have a ag that's surrounded?
That whole corner does not, at this point, does not make sense.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. And so I would just say, go forth and do your job. And
Okay. It's being driven because of course, we've adopted the new comprehensive plan, and some of those conversations, we're playing catch-up, commissioners. But we're in a good position now to start doing some of this.
But I would add, and echo what Commissioner Moser said, the landfill, all of the green ag down there, doesn't make any sense to me.
I have made notes to
Wellness complex,
study
and then
that.
north end, and then I would just start, once we get this done, start moving down the county, and we really need to clean up a lot of this stuff.
Okay. Then the other question is relative to multi-use along the South Fifth Corridor, as well as what I refer to as the North Yellowstone Corridor. In an old comprehensive plan, it was recommended that that zone eventually be phased out, but it is not. I have a number of things that are working. There's a huge interest all of a sudden because of price of land and other things. It makes sense to either be commercial general or it makes sense to be light industrial. And so we'll be studying those two ends and getting them corrected accordingly.
So you're talking like the North Yellowstone, once it passes, because it's in the
So
city
from
limits,
from Matt Oswald, the Oz subdivision, basically from Reservation Road
back into Chubbuck.
south towards Chubbuck along the Decay Road,
Yeah.
the railroad that runs through that north end.
I mean, I would look at it.
All of that needs to be studied.
It's
and
multi-use
fixed.
right now. Is light industrial, commercial activity allowed in multi?
Well, here's the problem: is that the multi-uses in the past, the multi-use says that it is up to the director's discretion. So if you have someone that comes in and says, "I have residential adjacent, and I want to build residential," then it has adjacency. So typically, you would say, "Yes, go ahead." What's happened along Decay Road is you've ended up with the north end of it as a platted subdivision with a piece that is now on the corner of Reservation Road and Yellowstone Highway, and they came in and asked to be taken and removed from the subdivision, and they now have a stone countertop business, okay? So now they have a commercial business that was originally in a residential zone, but in reality it was the multi-use zone, so you had that conflict. The multi-use zone, there is no simple solution for what goes where now that we are trying to fit and pigeonhole.
Yeah.
So anyway, just be aware that we'll be working
Yeah.
on that as well to get that resolved.
Like Carol says, I leave it to your discretion. You deal with it day in and day out.
Okay.
And see what people are doing. And we want to make it convenient, but we want to make it organized.
Okay. Well, you are now aware that if constituents of the county call and complain, we will be the antagonism of those calls and those complaints. But you are aware of what we're doing so that it just doesn't come and blindside you.
Yeah,
Well,
we
then-
appreciate that.
And if you're studying it, and you guys are looking forward and pushing forward, I think a lot of these people, once they actually understood, there would probably be a lot of consensus of, yeah, that's smart.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Any other questions or items for me while I'm here?
I'm not going to pick up.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks, Hal.
And with that, we'll be adjourned till 3 o'clock. Or on recess till 3 o'clock. What's the difference?